Digress. Welcome back to I Digress, a terrible hiatus. I know I've been doing other things, mea culpa, mea gulpa. I'm sorry, I've been making big fried breakfasts. I've been hanging out the fat balls for the sparrows in the garden. I've been hoovering up the front room. Hoovering up? Well, hoovering in the front room. However, where were we? Where are we? We're heading towards the denouement, and glancing down at my appalling Amazon Fire tablet, I see that it says 85%. And that not only applies to the battery power remaining in this tablet, but also to the amount of energy I have in my tank. Astute and assiduous and committed listeners will know that this is now the morning, because my voice sounds like... Fill in a word which you think is a critical word to use, a critical adjective about my voice. My voice sounds like, fill in your adjective, a little bit ropey. So not only is the voice a little bit limited, so's the brain function. It's not really woken up yet, despite having had 2 cups of tea, Sainsbury's Red Label. Well, if that isn't the floor sweepings from said house of groceries, I don't know what is. You lob in a bag and you wait for it to go darker. And it takes ages. You're just sitting there, gazing at this sort of wan liquid, thinking, when will this turn into a tawny nut brown brew, which is going to lift me out of, the arms of Morbius into something a little bit more lively, and it never happens. Do I mean Morbius, or is that a character from Doctor Who? It's probably a character from Doctor Who. Anyway, where were we? We were in Devon, on Dartmoor. Sir Henry was, until very recently, lying insensible, having been chased by a big dog, not a dachshund, not a red setter, but something bigger, chunkier, more chunkiferous than we might have ever imagined a dog in Great Britain could be. It's not a fur baby, it's a big hound. It's dead. Whatever it is, said Holmes. We've laid the family ghost once and forever. In mere size and strength, it was a terrible creature which was lying stretched before us. It was not a pure bloodhound, and it was not a pure mastiff, but it appeared to be a combination of the two, gaunt, savage, and as large as a small lioness, or half as big as a big lion, as large as 2 tapirs, gaffered together. Even now, in the stillness of death, the huge jaws seemed to be dripping with a bluish flame, and the small, deep-set, cruel eyes were ringed with fire. I placed my hand upon the glowing muzzle, and as I held them up, my own fingers smouldered and gleamed in the darkness. Phosphorus, I said, and at that moment my tablet chooses to stop, and it's asking me to play a game for free. Garden Escapes. I don't want to play Garden Escapes. Okay, and I'm back on there. Phosphorus, I said. A cunning preparation of it, said Holmes, sniffing at the dead animal. There is no smell which might have interfered with his power of scent. We owe you a deep apology, Sir Henry, for having exposed you to this fright. I was prepared for a hound, but not for such a creature as this, the size of 2 tapirs, gaffered together, with gaffer tape or Scotch tape, less effective, less strong. And the fog gave us little time to receive him. You have saved my life, having first endangered it. Are you strong enough to stand? Give me another mouthful of that brandy and I shall be ready for anything. So, Now, if you will help me up, what do you propose to do?" "To leave you here. You are not fit for further adventures tonight. If you will wait, one or other of us will go back with you to the hall." He tried to stagger to his feet, but he was still ghastly pale, not unlike my Sainsbury's tea this morning, and trembling in every limb. We helped him to a rock. "Another rock? No, thanks, I'm full." No, we helped him to a rock, where he sat shivering, with his face buried in his hands. "We must leave you now," said Holmes. "That's nice, isn't it? The rest of our work must be done, and every moment is of importance. We have our case, and now we only want our man." Horrible clicking. "We have our case, and now we only want our man. It's 1,000 to 1 against our—" "Oh," he continued, looking ahead, using all those skills of alertness and vivacity and just genius. "It's 1,000 to 1 against our finding him at the house," he continued as we retraced our steps swiftly down the path. "Those shots must have told him that the game was up. We were some distance off, and this fog may have deadened them." Who said that? I've no idea. Probably Watson. "We were some distance off, and this fog may have deadened them. He followed the hound to call him off. Of that you may be certain. No, he's gone by this time, but we'll search the house and make sure." The front door was open, so we rushed in and hurried from room to room to the amazement of a doddering old manservant who met us in the passage. There was no light save in the dining room, but Holmes caught up the lamp and left no corner of the house unexplored. No sign could we see of the man whom we were chasing. On the upper floor, however, one of the bedroom doors was locked. "There's someone in here," cried Lestrade. "I can hear a movement. Open this door." Comedic, unconvincing, move on. A faint moaning and rustling came from within. Oh no, it's not them. Holmes struck the door just over the lock with the flat of his foot, and it flew open. Very dynamic. Butch, pistol in hand, we all three rushed into the room. But there was no sign within it of that desperate and defiant villain whom we expected to see. What, having produced a low rustling and faint moaning? It's bound to be someone else, isn't it? But there was no sign within it of that desperate and defiant villain whom we expected to see. Instead, we were faced by an object so strange and so unexpected that we stood for a moment staring at it in amazement. The room had been fashioned into a small museum, and the walls were lined by a number of glass-topped cases full of that collection of butterflies and moths, the formation of which had been the relaxation of this complex and dangerous man. In the centre of this room there was an upright beam, which had been placed at some period as a support for the old worm-eaten bulk of timber which spanned the roof. To this post a figure was tied, so swathed and muffled in the sheets which had been used to secure it, that one could not for the moment tell whether it was that of a man or a woman. One towel passed round the throat, and was secured at the back of the pillar. Another covered the lower part of the face, and over it 2 dark eyes full of grief and shame and a dreadful questioning, stared back at us. Not very well done. And over it 2 dark eyes full of grief and shame and a dreadful questioning, stared back at us. Bit better. In a minute we had torn off the gag, unswathed the bonds, and Mrs. Stapleton, her of the funny accent, and Mrs. Stapleton sank upon the floor in front of us, poor woman. As her beautiful head fell upon her chest, as her beautiful head fell upon her chest, I saw the clear red wheel of a whiplash across her neck. "The brute!" cried Holmes. "Here, Lestrade, your brandy bottle. Put her in the chair. She has fainted from ill usage and exhaustion." She opened her eyes again. "Is he safe?" she asked. "Has he escaped?" He cannot escape us, madam." No, I did not mean my husband. Sir Henry, is he safe?" "Safe? Sir Tripthong." Just to give it extra Nicaraguan resonance. "Yes. And the hound?" "No. And the hound?" "He is dead." She gave a long sigh of satisfaction. Thank God. Oh, this villain. See how he has treated me." Turned into someone else now. She shot her arms out from her sleeves, and we saw with horror that they were all mottled with bruises. "But this is nothing. It is my mind and soul that he has tortured and defiled. I could not endure it. Ill usage, solitude, a life of deception, everything, as long as I could still cling to the hope that I had his love. But now I know that in this also I have been his dupe and his tool." "His what, sorry?" "His tool." She broke into passionate sobbing as she spoke, as did my audience. "You bear him no goodwill, madam," said Holmes. Not very good. Tell us then where we shall find him. If you have ever aided him in evil, help us now and so atone." "There is but one place where he can have fled," she answered. "There is an old tin mine on an island in the heart of the mire." What a beautiful song lyric that would be, wouldn't it? "There is an old tin mine on an island in the heart of the mire. There's an old tin mine on an island in the heart of the mire." Yes. EMI, Virgin Records, Island. Please phone my agent and sign me up. A beautiful, tuneful voice. And great lyrical and compositorial skill. Is there such a word as compositorial? There is now. It was there that he kept his hound, and there also he had made preparations so that he might have a refuge. That is where he would fly. The fog bank lay like white wool against the window. Holmes held the lamp towards it. "See," said he, "no one could find his way into the Grimpen mire tonight." She laughed and clapped her hands. Her eyes and teeth gleamed with fierce merriment. "He may find his way in, but never out," she cried. "How can he see the guiding wands tonight? We planted them together, he and I, to mark the pathway through the mire. Oh, if I could only have plucked them out today, then indeed— Don't know where she's from now. Somewhere exotic, that's all that matters. Then indeed you would have had him at your mercy." Beautiful rolled R there to convey a Catholicism and exoticism which otherwise we wouldn't achieve, and a precise GPS pinpoint to where she comes from, the precise postcode in Bogota. It was evident to us that all pursuit was in vain until the fog had lifted. Meanwhile, we left Lestrade in possession of the house, while Holmes and I went back with the baronet to Baskerville Hall. The story of the Stapletons could no longer be withheld from him, but he took the blow bravely when he learned the truth about the woman whom he had loved. But the shock of the night's adventures— Sorry, I've just switched off during that. Maybe I need a bit of toast. Bit of toast and Marmite. Do you have Marmite in the United States of America? If you don't, you should. Watch out for those high salt levels, though. Don't overspread it on your toast. A thin layer. Measure it with a micrometer. A thin layer is all you need. Marmite. Vegemite also available in Australia, but not the same thing. And supermarkets in Great Britain also do a yeasty spread under their own label. I've already discussed Sainsbury's, but Tesco's too do it. I don't know about Asda or Waitrose. Waitrose certainly don't do it. Some people have Bovril on their bread. It's beefy. Boss. I don't know where vril comes from. Vril. Sounds like a sort of, I don't know. Anyway, the story of the Stapletons could no longer be withheld from him. But he took the blow bravely. When he learned the truth about the woman whom he had loved. Well, he didn't love... yes, okay, yes. But the shock of the night's adventures had shattered his nerves, and before morning he lay delirious in a high fever under the care of Dr. Mortimer. The two of them were destined to travel together round the world before Sir Henry had become once more the hale, hearty man that he had been before he became... Beautiful work. The two of them were destined to travel together round the world on a Harley-Davidson soft-tail, before Sir Henry had become once more the hale, hearty man that he had been before he became master of that ill-omened estate. It was a Skoda Fabia. That ill-omened estate. A shooting brake. Oh, I could do with some bacon. Or some Marmite, some boring Marmite on toast. And now I come rapidly to the conclusion of this singular narrative, blimey, in which I have tried to make the reader share those dark fears, and I've really ruined the climax, haven't I, of this? You end up with, Mrs. Stapleton tied to a post in her attic, surrounded by her moths, her husband's moths, mirths. And now I come rapidly to the conclusion of this singular narrative, in which I've tried to make the reader share those dark fears and vague surmises which clouded our lives so long, and ended in so tragic a manner. On the morning after the death of the Hound, the fog had lifted, and we were guided by Mrs. Stapleton to the point where they had found a pathway through the bog. It helped us to realize the horror of this woman's life, when we saw the eagerness and joy with which she laid us on her husband's track. Okay. Just, Greg, a little tip for you. Try to think about what you're saying. Who knows, there could be, a editor of Faber and Faber tuning in to this on the tube as he makes his way to, the T.S. Eliot room at wherever Faber and Faber hang out in London. Could be listening to this and go, oh, I could use that bloke to read, the latest Peter Ackroyd. And that would be good, wouldn't it? And, then he goes, oh, he's a bit ropey with this verbatim reading of The Hound of the Baskervilles. A tad too many interjections for what one might consider a professional reading, a professional attempt. So, Greg, tip from the top, concentrate. It helped us to realize the horror of this woman's life when we saw the eagerness and joy with which she laid us on her husband's track. We left her still bad. We left her standing upon the thin peninsula of firm, peaty soil, which tapered out into the widespread bog. A peninsula of firm, peaty soil. From the end of it, a small wand planted here and there. Is that like a bulrush? A bulrush. All right, don't keep repeating it. From the end of it, a small wand planted here and there showed where the path zigzagged from tuft to tuft of rushes among those green-scummed pits and foul quagmires which barred the way to the stranger. Just like to apologise. Okay, so she's planted these reeds. They're hopping. They're going to hop from tussock to tussock. Are they not? Rank reeds and lush, slimy water plants sent an odour of decay and a heavy miasmatic vapour onto our faces. Miasma. You say miasma, miasma. And a heavy miasmatic vapour onto our faces, while a false step plunged us more than once thigh-deep into the dark, quivering mire, which shook for yards in soft undulations around our feet. Its tenacious grip plucked at our heels as we walked, and when we sank into it, it was as if some malignant hand was tugging us down into those obscene depths. So grim and purposeful was the clutch in which it held us. Once only we saw a trace that someone had passed that perilous way before us. From amid a tuft of cotton grass which bore it up out of the slime, some dark thing was projecting. Holmes sank to his waist as he stepped from the path to seize it. And had we not been there to drag him out, he could never have set his foot upon firm land again. He held an old black boot in the air. Myers, Toronto, was printed on the leather inside. Any relation to Mike Myers, I wonder? Has he got Canadian forebears? "It is worth a mud bath," said he. "It is our friend Sir Henry's missing boot. Thrown there by Stapleton in his flight." "Exactly. He retained it in his hand after using it to set the hound upon the track. He fled when he knew the game was up, still clutching it, and he hurled it away at this point of his flight. We know at least that he came so far in safety." But more than that we were never destined to know, though there was much which we might surmise. There was no chance of finding footsteps in the mire, for the rising mud oozed swiftly in upon them. But as we at last reached firmer ground beyond the morass, we all looked eagerly for them. But no slightest sign of them ever met our eyes. If the earth told a true story, then Stapleton never reached that island of refuge towards which he struggled through the fog upon that last night. Somewhere in the heart of the great Grimpen Mire, down in the fire, going so well. Somewhere in the heart of the great Grimpen Mire, down in the foul slime of the huge morass which had sucked him in, this cold and cruel-hearted man is forever buried. Many traces we found of him in the bog-girt island where he had hid his savage ally. A huge driving wheel and a shaft half filled with rubbish showed the position of an abandoned mine. Beside it were the crumbling remains of the cottages of the miners, driven away, no doubt, by the foul reek of the surrounding swamp. Well, the surrounding swamp would have always been there, wouldn't it? Or was it due to poor mine drainage that it developed? I don't know. If only I could speak to a local historian on Dartmoor. In one of these a staple and chain, with a quantity of gnawed bones, showed where the animal had been confined. It's much like a branch of Nando's, isn't it, round the back? A skeleton with a tangle of brown hair adhering to it lay among the debris. A skeleton with a tangle of brown hair adhering to it lay among the debris. "A dog," said Holmes. "By Jove, a curly-haired spaniel. Poor Mortimer will never see his pet again. Well, I do not know that this place contains any secret which we have not already fathomed. He could hide his hound, but he could not hush its voice, and hence came those cries which even in daylight were not pleasant to hear. On an emergency he could keep the hound in the outhouse at Merrypit. On an emergency he could keep the hound in the outhouse at Merrypit, but it was always a risk. And it was only on the supreme day— was that the day they have chicken supreme? And it was only on the supreme day, or was it the faggots' day, The faggots are meaty. A meaty main course, like rissoles, faggots, rissoles, beautiful. Brains faggots, try those if you're resident within the UK and you want a tasty snack, which is full of mystery meats, but very tasty nonetheless. Try the brains faggot, still available, frozen. And that's not an advert, really, but, well, it is actually, isn't it? It's a sort of advert. Not an advert, written by a ghost reviewer in Shanghai or Leningrad, but actually from someone who enjoys a brains faggot. Google them, you'll love them. And if you live elsewhere other than the United Kingdom, get them air freighted out to you. Buy them in bulk. Freeze them. Or if you live somewhere really cold, just put them out on the tundra and they'll keep fresh as a daisy for several days. On an emergency, he could keep the hound in the outhouse at Merrypit. But it was always a risk. And it was only on the supreme day, which he regarded as the end of all his efforts, that he dared do it. This paste in the tin, no, it's Holmes talking. God, I'm good. This paste in the tin is no doubt the luminous mixture with which the creature was daubed. It was suggested, of course, by the story of the family hellhound, and by the desire to frighten old Sir Charles to death. No wonder the poor devil of a convict ran and screamed, even as our friend did, and as we ourselves might have done when he saw a creature bounding through the darkness of the moor upon his track. It was a cunning device, for, apart from the chance of driving your victim to his death, what peasant would venture to inquire too closely into such a creature should he get sight of it, as many have done upon the moor? I said it in London, Watson, and I say it again now, that never yet have we helped to hunt down a more dangerous man than he who is lying yonder. He swept his long arm towards the huge mottled expanse of green-splotched bog, which stretched away until it merged into the russet slopes of the moor. One more time. He swept his long arm towards the huge mottled expanse of green-splotched bog, which stretched away until it merged into the russet slopes of the moor. And, I'm going to try and turn over. And there's a retrospection. That's annoying, because I thought it was all done with. But Chapter 15, a retrospection. I was just about to let off the party poppers and go and, carry myself shoulder high around the quadrangle here, which isn't easy to do, but I would have attempted it. But now it looks like there's yet more, tons more. It goes on, and I'm flicking through it, and I'm not easily depressed. I wouldn't want my main demographic of young, sprightly people thinking that I somehow lack that sort of Californian joie de vivre that we all should, even to our dying day, inhabit and manifest. Chapter 15, a retrospection. It was the end of November, and Holmes and I sat upon a raw and foggy night on either side of a blazing fire in our sitting room in Baker Street. Since the tragic upshot of our visit to Devonshire, upshot, we don't hear enough about the upshot of something, very good word. Since the tragic upshot of our visit to Devonshire, he had been engaged in two affairs of the utmost importance. In the first of which he had exposed the atrocious conduct of Colonel Upwood, in connection with the famous card scandal of the Nonpareil Club, while in the second he had defended the unfortunate Madame Montpensier from the charge of murder which hung over her in connection with the death of her stepdaughter, Mademoiselle Carrère, the young lady who, as it will be remembered, was found 6 months later, alive and married in New York. My friend was in excellent spirits over the success which had attended a succession of difficult and important cases, so that I was able to induce him to discuss the details of the Baskerville mystery. I had waited patiently for the opportunity, for I was aware that he would never permit cases to overlap. And that his clear and logical mind would not be drawn from its present work to dwell upon memories of the past. Sir Henry and Dr. Mortimer were, however, in London, on their way to that long voyage which had been recommended for the restoration of his shattered nerves. OK, and we're back. I don't know what happened then. I think we might have had a mini electrical thing. The screen went off and then it came on again, but it's not set to have a screensaver on it. This is my monitor I'm talking about now. And very odd. They had called upon us that very afternoon, so that it was natural that the subject should come up for discussion. The whole course of events, said Holmes, from the point of view of the man who called himself Stapleton, was simple and direct. Although to us, who had no means in the beginning of knowing the motives of his actions and could only learn part of the facts, it all appeared exceedingly complex. I have had the advantage of 2 conversations with Mrs. Stapleton, and the case has now been so entirely cleared up that I am not aware that there is anything which has remained a secret to us. You will find a few notes upon the matter under the heading B in my indexed list of cases. Yes, I'm just currently struggling to enunciate my words properly. You will find a few notes upon the matter under the heading B in my indexed list of cases. Well, it's only 9 o'clock. Perhaps you would kindly give me a sketch of the course of events from memory. Certainly, although I cannot guarantee that I carry all the facts in my mind. Intense mental concentration has a curious way of blotting out what has passed. The barrister who has his case at his fingers' ends and is... The barrister, or indeed the barista. Was that a soy latte with hazelnut topping served in a china cup with sprinkles? The barista who has his case at his fingers' ends and is able to argue with an expert upon his own subject finds that a week or 2 of the courts will drive it all out of his head once more, so each of my cases displaces the last, and Mademoiselle Carrère has blurred my recollection of Baskerville Hall. I bet she has. Tomorrow some other little problem may be submitted to my notice, which will in turn dispossess the fair French lady and the infamous Upwood. So far as the case of the Hound goes, however, I will give you the course of events as nearly as I can, and you will suggest click, 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 and you will suggest anything, which I may have forgotten. My inquiries show beyond all question that the family portrait did not lie, and that this fellow was indeed a Baskerville. He was a son of that Roger Baskerville, the younger brother of Sir Charles, who fled with a sinister reputation to South America, where he was said to have died unmarried. He did, as a matter of fact, marry, and had 1 child, this fellow whose real name is the same as his father's. He married Beryl Garcia, one of the beauties of Costa Rica, and having purloined a considerable sum of public money, he changed his name to Vandeleur and fled to England, where he established a school in the east of Yorkshire, where I very nearly reside, a couple of 100 yards from the east of Yorkshire. How interesting. His reason for attempting this special line of business was that he had struck up an acquaintance with a consumptive tutor upon the voyage home, and that he had used this man's ability to make the undertaking a success. Fraser, the tutor, died, however, and the school, which had begun well, sank from disrepute into infamy. The Vandeleurs found it convenient to change their name to Stapleton, and he brought the remains of his fortune, his schemes for the fortune, and his taste for entomology to the south of England. I learned at the British Museum that he was a recognised authority upon the subject, and that the name of Vandeleur has been permanently attached to a certain moth, which he had, in his Yorkshire days, been the first to describe. Well, it's grey, small, and frightening. Well done, we'll call it the Vandeleur moth. We now come to that portion of his life which has proved to be of such intense interest to us. The fellow had evidently made inquiry, or inquiry, as we say in the United Kingdom, soon to be the disunited kingdom. The fellow had evidently made inquiry, and found that only 2 lives intervened between him and a valuable estate, the aforementioned Skoda Fabia 1.6. Petrol. When he went to Devonshire his plans were, I believe, exceedingly hazy. But that he meant mischief from the first is evident from the way in which he took his wife with him in the character of his sister. The idea of using her as a decoy was clearly already in his mind, though he may not have been certain how the details of his plot were to be arranged. He meant in the end to have the estate, and he was ready to use any tool or run any risk for that end. His first act was to establish himself as near to his ancestral home as he could, and his second was to cultivate a friendship with Sir Charles Baskerville and with the neighbours. The baronet himself told him about the family hound, and so prepared the way for his own death. Stapleton, as I will continue to call him, knew that the old man's heart was weak, and that a shock would kill him. So much he had learned from Dr. Mortimer. He had heard also that Sir Charles was superstitious, and had taken this grim legend very seriously. His ingenious mind instantly suggested a way by which the baronet could be done to death. And yet it would be hardly possible to bring home the guilt to the real murderer. Having conceived the idea, he proceeded to carry it out with considerable finesse. An ordinary schemer would have been content to work with a savage hound. An ordinary schemer would have been content to work with a savage hound. The use of artificial means to make the creature diabolical was a flash of genius upon his part. The dog he bought in London from Ross and Mangles, the dealers in Fulham Road. The dog he bought in London from Ross and Mangles, the dealers in Fulham Road. Hello, I'm Mangles. I do the Alsatians, I do the Mastiffs, I do the brutal dogs, the pit bulls, and I'm Ross. I do the Chihuahuas, the fur babies, the little miniature Dachshunds. I do all those. Ross and Mangles. Ross and Mangles. Dog dealers, Fulham Road. Something for everyone. Ladies, you want a little toy miniature? Ross is your man. Mangles, I do the big Alsatians. The flat-back Alsatians, the slopey-back Alsatians. Slopey-back, sir? Yep. You'll also be wanting a car to take that home with, won't you? The Skoda Fabia Estate, 1.6, petrol, very roomy, and of course it's, got the VAG badge, the Volkswagen Audi Group, or Audi, as I said for many years until being upgraded by more knowing people who said, "That's Audi, mate. Vorsprung Dick Technik." It was the strongest and most savage in their possession. I think Mr. Mangles sold it. Sorry about that. He brought it down by the North Devon line and walked a great distance over the moor so as to get it home without exciting any remarks. "Oh, that's a big dog, isn't it?" So nobody saw it, so they didn't say that. "That's right, that is a big dog, that's a big dog going up to..." Why's he got that big dog then? "Well, he's got a beautiful wife, isn't he, Beryl Garcia?" "That's not his wife, it's his sister." Yes. He had already, on his insect hunts, learned to penetrate the Grimpen mire, and so had found a safe hiding place for the creature. Here he kennelled it and waited his chance. But it was some time coming. The old gentleman could not be decoyed outside of his grounds at night. Several times Stapleton lurked about with his hound, but without avail. Oh, I'm fed up with lurking about. It was during these fruitless quests that he, or rather his ally, was seen by peasants, and that the legend of the demon dog received a new confirmation. He had hoped that his wife might lure Sir Charles to his ruin, but here she proved unexpectedly independent. She would not endeavour to entangle the old gentleman in a sentimental attachment which might deliver him over to his enemy. She would not endeavour to entangle the old gentleman in a sentimental attachment. Oh dear. I need a cup of coffee. I need a Danish pastry, possibly a cinnamon swirl. Who was I advertising earlier? Can't remember. Marmite, was it? No, something else. Gone, don't know. She would not endeavour to entangle the old gentleman in a sentimental attachment which might deliver him over to his enemy. Threats and even, I am sorry to say, blows refused to move her. She would have nothing to do with it, and for a time Stapleton was at a deadlock. He found a way out of his difficulties through the chance that Sir Charles, who had conceived a friendship for him, made him the minister of his charity in the case of this unfortunate woman, Mrs. Laura Lyons. By representing himself as a single man, he acquired complete influence over her, and he gave her to understand that in the event of her obtaining a divorce from her husband, he would marry her. His plans were suddenly brought to a head by his knowledge that Sir Charles was about to leave the Hall on the advice of Dr. Mortimer, with whose opinion he himself pretended to coincide. He must act at once, or his victim might get beyond his power. He therefore put pressure upon Mrs. Lyons to write this letter, imploring the old man to give her an interview on the evening before his departure for London. He then, by a specious argument, prevented her from going, and so had the chance for which he had waited. Driving back in the evening from Coombe Tracey, he was in time to get his hound, to treat it with his infernal paint, and to bring the beast round to the gate at which he had reason to expect that he would find the old gentleman waiting. The dog, incited by its master, sprang over the wicket gate and pursued the unfortunate baronet, who fled screaming down the yew alley. In that gloomy tunnel it must indeed have been a dreadful sight to see that huge black creature, with its flaming jaws and blazing eyes, bounding after its victim. He fell dead at the end of the alley from heart disease and terror. The hound had kept upon the grassy border, while the baronet had run down the path, so that no track but the man's was visible. All that training to stay on the grassy border, stay on the grassy... No, not on the shingle, not on the gravel. Grassy border, grassy border. I wonder what they called him. I wonder what Stapleton... Does history relate whether Stapleton had a nice name for him? Nibbles, Bambi, Smirnov. I wonder what they called him. Down Smirnov. On seeing him lying still, the creature had probably approached to sniff at him, but finding him dead, had turned away again. It was then that it left the print, which was actually observed by Dr. Mortimer. The hound was called off and hurried away to its lair in the Grimpen Mire, and a mystery was left which puzzled the authorities, alarmed the countryside, and finally brought the case within the scope of our observation. So much for the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. So much for the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. You perceive the devilish cunning of it, for really it would be almost impossible to make a case against the real murderer. His only accomplice was one who could never give him away, and the grotesque, inconceivable nature of the device only served to make it more effective. Both of the women concerned in the case, Mrs. Stapleton and Mrs. Laura Lyons, were left with the strong suspicion against Stapleton. Strong suspicion? Surely they knew. Mrs. Stapleton knew that he had designs upon the old man, and also of the existence of the hound. Mrs. Lyons knew neither of these things, but had been impressed by the death occurring at the time of an uncancelled appointment, which was only known to him. However, both of them were under his influence, and he had nothing to fear from them. The first half of his task was successfully accomplished, but the more difficult still remained. It is possible that Stapleton did not know of the existence of an heir in Canada. In any case, he would very soon learn it from his friend Dr. Mortimer, and he was told by the latter all details about the arrival of Henry Baskerville. Stapleton's first idea was that this young stranger from Canada might possibly be done to death in London without coming down to Devonshire at all. He distrusted his wife, ever since she had refused to help him in laying a trap for the old man, and he dared not leave her long out of his sight, for fear he should lose his influence over her. It was for this reason that he took her to London with him. They lodged, I find, at the Mexborough Private Hotel in Craven Street, which was actually one of those called upon by my agent in search of evidence. Here he kept his wife imprisoned in her room while he, disguised in a beard, followed Dr. Mortimer to Baker Street, and afterwards to the station and to the Northumberland Hotel. His wife had some inkling of his plans, but she had such a fear of her husband, a fear founded upon brutal ill-treatment, that she dare not write to warn the man whom she knew to be in danger. If the letter should fall into Stapleton's hands, her own life would not be safe. Eventually, as we know, she adopted the expedient of cutting out the words which would form the message and addressing the letter in a disguised hand. It reached the baronet, and gave him the first warning of his danger. It was very essential for Stapleton to get some article of Sir Henry's attire, so that, in case he was driven to use the dog, he might always have the means of setting him upon his track. With characteristic promptness and audacity, he set about this at once, and we cannot doubt that the boots, or chambermaid of the hotel— the boots, yes, the man who polishes your shoes of a morning. Why do we not have that any more today? Because wouldn't that be nice to pop your nubuck thongs or flip-flops outside your door, and a man would come along and sanitize them, deodorize them, and generally make them feel new again. Take them outside and give them a good once-over with the Karcher pressure washer. Other washers are available, but not in yellow. And we cannot doubt that the boots or chambermaid of the hotel was well bribed to help him in his design. By chance, however, the first boot which was procured for him was a new one, got that new car smell, and therefore useless for his purpose. He then had it returned and obtained another, a most instructive incident, since it proved conclusively to my mind that we were dealing with a real hound, as no other supposition could explain this anxiety to obtain an old boot, and this indifference to a new one. The more outré and grotesque an incident is, the more carefully it deserves to be examined, and the very point which appears to complicate a case is, when duly considered and scientifically handled, the one which is most likely to elucidate it. Now there we have a very interesting laying out of one of Sherlock's, and Conan Doyle's approaches to crime solving. So I'm going to say it again, not for you, because you heard it. I'm going to say it again for my brain, just so it sinks in. The more outré and grotesque an incident is, the more carefully it deserves to be examined. And the very point which appears to complicate a case is, when duly considered and scientifically handled, the one which is most likely to elucidate it. Then we had the visit from our friends next morning, shadowed always by Stapleton in the cab. From his knowledge of our rooms and of my appearance, as well as from his general conduct, I am inclined to think that Stapleton's career of crime has been by no means limited to this single Baskerville affair. It is suggestive that during the last 3 years there have been 4 considerable burglaries in the West Country, for none of which was any criminal ever arrested. The last of these at Folkestone Court in May was remarkable for the cold-blooded pistoling of the page, oh dear, who surprised the masked and solitary burglar. I cannot doubt that Stapleton recruited his waning resources in this fashion, and that for years he has been a desperate and dangerous man. We had an example of his readiness of resource that morning when he got away from us so successfully, and also of his audacity in sending back my own name to me through the cabman, and also of his audacity in sending back my own name to me through the cabman. From that moment he understood that I had taken over the case in London, and that therefore there was no chance for him there. Very poor, very poor. He returned to Dartmoor and awaited the arrival of the baronet. "One moment," said I. "You have no doubt described the sequence of events correctly, but there is one point which you have left unexplained. What became of the hound when its master was in London? I have given some attention to this matter, and it is undoubtedly of importance. There can be no question that Stapleton had a confidant, though it is unlikely that he ever placed himself in his power by sharing all his plans with him. There was an old manservant at Merripit House whose name was Anthony. His connection with the Stapletons can be traced for several years, as far back as the schoolmastering days, so that he must have been aware that his master and mistress were really husband and wife. This man has disappeared, and has escaped from the country. It is suggestive that Anthony is not a common name in England, while Antonio is so in all Spanish or Spanish-American countries. The man, like Mrs. Stapleton herself, spoke good English, but with a curious lisping accent. Yes, it is true. I have myself seen this old man cross the Grimpen Mire by the path which Stapleton had marked out. It is very probable, therefore, that in the absence of his master, it was he who cared for the hound. I will just give him half a tin of pedigree chum and a handful of the dry food that Mr. Stapleton likes me to give him. Half a tin of pedigree chum and a handful of and a couple of milky bones for a snack, for a treat. Though he may never have known the purpose for which the beast was used. The Stapletons then went down to Devonshire, whither they were soon followed by Sir Henry and you. One word now as to how I stood myself at that time. One word now— well, you just pushed on the arms and you managed to stand. One word now as to how I stood myself at that time. It may possibly recur to your memory that when I examined the paper upon which the printed words were fastened, I made a close inspection for the watermark. In doing so, I held it within a few inches of my eyes, and was conscious of a faint smell of the scent known as white jessamine. There are 75 perfumes, which it is very necessary that a criminal expert should be able to distinguish from each other. Brut, Old Spice, High Karate, and cases have more than once, within my own experience, depended upon their prompt recognition. The scent suggested the presence of a lady, and already my thoughts began to turn towards the Stapletons. Thus I had made certain of the hound, and had guessed at the criminal, before ever we went to the West Country. It was my game to watch Stapleton. It was evident, however, that I could not do this if I were with you, since he would be keenly on his guard. I deceived everybody, therefore yourself included. I deceived everybody, therefore, yourself included, and I came down secretly when I was supposed to be in London. My hardships were not so great as you Toast. Cup of coffee, toast, cup of coffee. Losing it, must keep going. My hardships were not so great as you imagined, though such trifling details must never interfere with the investigation of a case. I stayed for the most part at Coombe Tracey, and only used the hut upon the moor when it was necessary to be near the scene of action. Cartwright had come down with me, and in his disguise as a country boy, he was of great assistance to me. I was dependent upon him for food and clean linen. When I was watching Stapleton, Cartwright was frequently watching you, so that I was able to keep my hand upon all the strings. I have already told you that your reports reached me rapidly, being forwarded instantly from Baker Street to Coombe Tracey. They were of great service to me, and especially that one incidentally truthful piece of biography of Stapleton's. I was able to establish the identity of the man and the woman, and knew at last exactly how I stood. The case had been considerably complicated through the incident of the escaped convict, and the relations between him and the Barrymores. This also you cleared up in a very effective way, though I had already come to the same conclusions from my own observations. By the time that you discovered me upon the moor, I had a complete knowledge of the whole business, but I had not a case which could go to a jury. Even Stapleton's attempt upon Sir Henry that night, which ended in the death of the unfortunate convict, did not help us much in proving murder against our man. There seemed to be no alternative but to catch him red-handed, and to do so we had to use Sir Henry, alone and apparently unprotected, as a bait. We did so, and at the cost of a severe shock to our client, We succeeded in completing our case and driving Stapleton to his destruction. That Sir Henry should have been exposed to this is, I must confess, a reproach to my management of the case. But we had no means of foreseeing the terrible and paralyzing spectacle which the beast presented, nor could we predict the fog which enabled him to burst upon us at such short notice. We succeeded in our object at a cost which both the specialist and Dr. Mortimer assure me will be a temporary one. A long journey may enable our friend to recover not only from his shattered nerves, but also from his wounded feelings. His love for the lady was deep and sincere, and to him the saddest part of all this black business was that he should have been deceived by her. It only remains to indicate the part which she had played throughout. There can be no doubt that Stapleton exercised an influence over her, which may have been love, or may have been fear, or very possibly both, since they are by no means incompatible emotions. It was at least absolutely effective. At his command she consented to pass as his sister, though he found the limits of his power over her when he endeavoured to make her the direct accessory to murder. She was ready to warn Sir Henry so far as she could, without implicating her husband, and again she tried to do so. Stapleton himself seems to have been capable of jealousy, and when he saw the baronet paying court to the lady, even though it was part of his own plan, still he could not help interrupting with a passionate outburst which revealed the fiery soul which his self-contained manner so cleverly concealed. By encouraging the intimacy, he made it certain that Sir Henry would frequently come to Merrypit House. How exciting! By encouraging the intimacy, he made it certain that Sir Henry would frequently come to Merrypit House, and that he would sooner or later get the opportunity which he desired. On the day of the crisis, however, his wife turned suddenly against him. She had learned something of the death of the convict, and she knew that the hound was being kept in the outhouse on the evening that Sir Henry was coming to dinner. She taxed her husband with his intended crime, and a furious scene followed in which he showed her for the first time that she had a rival in his love. Her fidelity turned in an instant to bitter hatred, and he saw that she would betray him. He tied her up, therefore, that she might have no chance of warning Sir Henry, and he hoped, no doubt, that when the whole countryside put down the baronet's death to the curse of his family, as they certainly would do, he could win his wife back to accept an accomplished fact, and to keep silent upon what she knew, and to keep silent upon what she knew. In this I fancy that in any case he made a miscalculation, and that, if we had not been there, his doom would none the less have been sealed. A woman of Spanish blood does not condone such an injury so lightly. And now, my dear Watson, without referring to my notes, I cannot give you a more detailed account of this curious case. I do not know that anything essential has been left unexplained. He could not hope to frighten Sir Henry to death, as he had done the old uncle with his bogey hound. The beast was savage and half-starved. If its appearance did not frighten its victim to death, at least it would paralyze the resistance which might be offered. No doubt. There only remains one difficulty. If Stapleton came into the succession, how could he explain the fact that he, the heir, had been living unannounced under another name so close to the property? How could he claim it without causing suspicion and inquiry? It is a formidable difficulty, and I fear that you ask too much when you expect me to solve it. The past and the present are within the field of my inquiry. But what a man may do in the future is a hard question to answer. Mrs. Stapleton has heard her husband discuss the problem on several occasions. There were 3 possible courses. He might claim the property from South America. He might claim the property from my screen stopped again. Well, it's not on a... Is it? On a timer, I'll have to check. It is a formidable difficulty, and I fear that you ask too much when you expect me to solve it. The past and the present are within my field of inquiry, and what a man may do in the future is a hard question to answer. Mrs. Stapleton has heard her husband discuss the problem on several occasions, and there were 3 possible courses. He might claim the property from South America, establish his identity before the British authorities there, and so obtain the fortune, without ever coming to England at all. Or he might adopt an elaborate disguise during the short time that he need be in London. Or again he might furnish an accomplice. Or again he might furnish an accomplice with the proofs and papers, putting him in as heir, and retaining a claim upon some proportion of his income. We cannot doubt from what we know of him that he would have found some way out of the difficulty. And now, my dear Watson, we have had some weeks of severe work, and for one evening I think we may turn our thoughts into more pleasant channels. I have a box for Les Huguenots. Have you heard the De Rescue? Might I trouble you then to be ready in half an hour? And we can stop at Marcini's for a little dinner on the way. And, there we have it. That was the conclusion. De Rescue's might be pronounced like that, and I expect I looked it up when I read the more proper version, which is to be found on another site on YouTube. But Les Huguenots, the Huguenots, there's an opera, I suppose. I don't know who wrote it. And there we have it. That's about the end of I Digress, Hound of the Baskervilles. It only remains to thank you for tuning in, and hope some people managed to glean the odd tiny speck of gold from a panful of silt up the artistic Klondike, where I pan for the odd light-hearted aside and attempt to read a classical work. And it only remains for me to wish you all a happy summer. I'm going to choose very shortly a new book to attempt in this strange manner, this strange meandering manner, and someone suggested Moby Dick, and it's a possibility. It's a bit long, Moby Dick. I had thought of Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, which is a kind of first-person, kind of poor, loony Russian person agonizing over stuff, and that might suit my temperament very well. But as I say, this has gone on much further than I thought it would do. We're nearly at an hour, and that's the longest one of these, and I'm still supposed to be using my voice later in the day to record half a proper book, and it doesn't bode well, does it? It doesn't bode well at all. But thanks for listening. Leave your comments as usual. Many thanks, and what can I say? What can I say?